My husband kept joking that he would leave me for my best friend if he ever had a chance, so I packed his bag and said, "Do it now." Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. I want to take you back to a Friday night in Ohio, inside a dining room that smelled of roasted rosemary chicken and expensive red wine. It was supposed to be a celebration. My best friend, Carol, had just gotten engaged to a wonderful man named David, and my husband, Mark, and I were hosting them. I remember looking around the table, thinking about how perfect everything looked. The crystal glasses were sparkling, the napkins were folded just right, and for a moment, I felt a sense of peace. But if you are listening to this, you know that peace is often just the calm before a terrible storm. Mark had been drinking. Not enough to be stumbling drunk, but enough that his filter was completely gone. He was 54, 2 years older than me, and lately, he had been going through what I could only describe as a crisis. He dyed his hair, bought shirts that were too tight, and had this desperate need to be the center of attention. We were halfway through the main course when David, Carol's fiancé, reached over and squeezed her hand. He said something sweet about how lucky he was. That was when Mark cleared his throat. The sound was loud, aggressive, cutting through the pleasant conversation like a knife. Mark leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine glass, and looked directly at Carol. He had this smirk on his face that I had grown to hate over the last few years. He said, "You know, David, you better hold on to her tight. Because if Carol here was single, I'd trade Linda in for her in a heartbeat." The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. David looked uncomfortable, his smile freezing on his face. Carol went pale. She looked at me, her eyes wide with horror, and then looked down at her plate. I forced a laugh. That's what I always did. I was the peacemaker. I was the one who smoothed things over. I said, "Oh, Mark, stop it. You've had too much wine." But he didn't stop. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on my best friend. "I'm serious," he said, and his voice wasn't joking anymore. It was slurring slightly, but the intent was clear. Man to man, David. If I had the chance? If Linda wasn't in the picture? I'd leave her for Carol before the check even hit the table. Look at her. She's aged like fine wine. Linda, well, Linda is just aging. He laughed. A loud, booming laugh that echoed off the walls of the home I had spent 25 years building with him. He looked around the table, expecting us to join in. Expecting us to validate his cruelty as humor. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was quiet. It was the sound of a final thread breaking after years of being pulled too tight. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my wine in his face, although he certainly deserved it. I simply stood up. My chair scraped against the hardwood floor, a harsh sound in the silent room. "Linda?" Mark asked, looking confused. "Where are you going? Can't take a joke?" I didn't answer him. I walked out of the dining room, down the hallway, and into our bedroom. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but my hands were steady. I pulled Mark's suitcase out of the top shelf of the closet. I threw it on the bed and unzipped it. I walked to his dresser. I grabbed handfuls of his underwear, his socks, his t-shirts. I didn't fold them. I stuffed them in. I went to the bathroom and grabbed his toothbrush, his razor, and that ridiculous hair dye he thought I didn't know about. I threw it all into the bag. I could hear voices from the dining room. Mark was still talking, probably telling David that I was being hormonal or sensitive. He had no idea that his life was being packed away into a Samsonite suitcase at that very moment. I zipped the bag shut. It was heavy, but adrenaline gave me strength I didn't know I had. I dragged it down the hallway. The wheels rumbled on the floorboards, a low growl of approaching thunder. I walked back into the dining room. Mark was just raising his glass to his lips. Carol was whispering something to David, looking ready to bolt. I didn't say a word. I lifted the suitcase and dropped it right in the center of the living room floor, just a few feet from the dining table. The thud caused the silverware to rattle. Mark lowered his glass. He looked at the bag, then at me. "What is this?" he asked, a nervous chuckle escaping his lips. "Are we going on vacation?" I looked him dead in the eye. I looked at the man I had supported through job losses, through his mother's illnesses, through his midlife crisis. And I felt nothing. No love. No hate. Just a cold, hard resolve. "You said you'd leave me for Carol if you had the chance," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. I pointed at the door. "Here is your chance. Take it. Get out." For a solid 10 seconds, nobody moved. It felt like time had frozen in that dining room. Mark looked at the suitcase, then back at me, his face twisting into a mask of disbelief and annoyance. He clearly thought this was theater. He thought I was putting on a show and that any minute I would break down, cry, and ask for his forgiveness for embarrassing him. "Linda, stop being dramatic," Mark said, waving his hand dismissively. "It was a joke. Jesus, you're embarrassing yourself in front of our guests. Sit down." "I'm not sitting down," I told him. "And I'm not embarrassing myself." "You embarrassed yourself. You embarrassed me. You disrespected our marriage in front of my best friend and her fiancé. Again." "Again?" Mark scoffed. "Oh, here we go. Bringing up the past. You women never let anything go." Carol suddenly stood up. Her chair fell backward with a crash. Carol is usually the calmest person I know. She's a yoga instructor, for heaven's sake, but her face was bright red with fury. "It's not a joke, Mark," Carol spat out. Her voice shook. "It's never been funny. It makes me sick. I have told you a dozen times to stop saying things like that, and you just laugh. It's creepy, and it's disrespectful to Linda." Mark turned on her, his face flushing an ugly shade of purple. "Oh, don't pretend you don't love the attention, Carol. All women love knowing they're desired. Don't act like a prude." David, who is usually a gentle giant, stood up then. He stepped between Mark and Carol. "I think you need to leave," David said, his voice low and dangerous. "You need to listen to your wife and get out." Mark looked around the room. He realized suddenly that he had no allies here. He looked at me, searching for the soft, yielding wife he had walked over for decades. He didn't find her. "Fine," Mark sneered. He stood up, knocking his wine glass over. Red wine spilled across the white tablecloth I had ironed that morning, spreading like a bloodstain. "You want me to go? I'll go. But don't expect me to come crawling back when you realize you can't pay the bills without me. You're crazy, Linda. You've lost your mind." He grabbed the handle of the suitcase. "I'm going to my mother's. Don't call me when you get lonely." He stormed to the front door. I followed him, not to stop him, but to lock it behind him. He slammed the door so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. I immediately turned the deadbolt. Click. That sound. That click. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. My knees suddenly felt like jelly. I slid down until I was sitting on the floor of the entryway. I could hear Mark's car engine revving aggressively outside, tires squealing as he peeled out of the driveway. Carol was beside me in an instant, sitting on the floor in her nice dress, wrapping her arms around me. David stood awkwardly nearby, offering to clean up the spilled wine. "I'm so sorry, Linda," Carol whispered, tears running down her face. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, I told her, though my voice sounded hollow to my own ears. Eventually, they left. They didn't want to leave me alone, but I insisted. I needed the silence. I needed to think. I sat on the couch in the dark living room. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, aching emptiness. My mind started drifting back, replaying not just tonight, but the last 2 years. Mark was right about one thing, this wasn't the first time. The silence of the house triggered a memory so vivid I could smell the turkey. It was Thanksgiving, 2 years ago. My parents were there. Mark's parents were there. I had spent 3 days cooking. I was exhausted, wearing an apron covered in flour, my hair a mess because I hadn't had time to shower before guests arrived. Carol had stopped by to drop off a pie. She looked stunning, fresh, makeup perfect, wearing a fitted sweater dress. Mark had stood at the head of the table, carving the turkey. He looked at Carol, then looked at me, sweating over the gravy boat. You know who should have married into this family? He had announced to the entire table, holding the carving knife high. Carol. She's basically perfect. Too bad she met me second. Right, Mom? My mother had dropped her fork. My father had choked on his water. And Mark? He had just laughed. Relax, people. Can't a man appreciate beauty? I'm sitting right here with the consolation prize, aren't I? I remember freezing. I remember the burning shame that started in my chest and flooded my face. I wanted to disappear. But I didn't. I forced a smile. I said, Mark, just carve the turkey. I swallowed that humiliation. Just like I swallowed the comment at my birthday party. Just like I swallowed the jokes at the neighborhood barbecue. Sitting there in the dark, I realized that tonight wasn't a sudden explosion. It was the inevitable eruption of a volcano that had been building pressure for years. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in the middle of our king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling fan cutting through the shadows. The empty space beside me didn't feel lonely, it felt spacious. For the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking myself to make room for Mark's ego. My mind kept churning, digging up memories I had buried deep down to keep the peace. It wasn't just the public jokes. It was the quiet, subtle cuts that happened within the four walls of our home. It was the way Mark had systematically dismantled my self-esteem, piece by piece, so slowly I hadn't even noticed I was disappearing. I remembered a Tuesday evening last month. I had just come home from work. I'm a senior accountant, and tax season was approaching, so I was pulling 10-hour days. I was exhausted, my feet were swollen, and I was still wearing my work suit. I walked into the kitchen to start dinner, and Mark was sitting at the counter, scrolling on his phone. He didn't ask about my day. He didn't ask about the promotion I was gunning for. He just looked up, scanned my outfit, and smirked. You know, he said, tapping his screen. I saw Carol at the gym today. She was wearing these yoga pants, man. She puts in the work. You should ask her for her routine. You've been looking a little tired lately. Frumpy. I'm working 50 hours a week, Mark, I had snapped, opening the fridge. I'm tired because I'm paying our mortgage. Always about the money with you, he rolled his eyes. Carol works, too. She manages to keep it tight. I'm just saying, Linda. A man has needs. Visual needs. You used to try harder. I remember standing there, holding a bag of carrots, feeling tears prick my eyes. I felt ugly. I felt old. And worst of all, I felt like he was right. He made me feel like my value was solely determined by how well I compared to my best friend. It wasn't just looks. It was everything. If I made a roast, he'd say, "It's good, but remember that brisket Carol made last summer? That melted in your mouth." This is a little dry. If I bought a new dress, he'd say, nice. But I think bright colors suit Carol better. You should stick to neutrals. They hide your areas. He pitted us against each other constantly. But the twisted part was, he did it in a way that made me feel guilty for being jealous. If I complained, I was insecure. If I got angry, I was crazy. I thought about the finances. That was the biggest irony of all. Mark hadn't held a steady job in 4 years. He called himself a consultant, which mostly meant he sat in his home office playing video games and making occasional phone calls. I paid the electric bill. I paid for the groceries. I paid for his car insurance. Yet, he acted like he was the prize. He acted like he was doing me a favor by staying married to me. There was one memory that made my blood run cold as I lay there. About 3 months ago, Mark had been complaining about money. He wanted a new set of golf clubs. I told him we couldn't afford it because we needed to fix the roof. You're so cheap, Linda, he had sneered. You have no vision. You know, Carol's fiancé just bought her a diamond necklace. Must be nice to be with a man who appreciates you. Or maybe it's just that Carol is the kind of woman who inspires generosity. You inspire budgeting. I had internalized that. I had actually sat down that night and looked at our budget, trying to see if I could squeeze out enough for his golf clubs, just to prove I wasn't cheap, just to prove I could be as inspiring as Carol. God, I had been so stupid. I sat up in bed, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He wasn't just joking. He wasn't just a bad comedian. He was mean. He was deliberately cruel. He used Carol as a weapon to keep me insecure, to keep me off balance, so I would work harder to please him. He made me grateful that he stayed, while telling me every day that he wanted to leave. I looked at the nightstand. There was a framed photo of us from 10 years ago. I picked it up. I looked at my younger self, smiling, unaware of the years of manipulation ahead. I looked at Mark's arm around me, looking possessive, not loving. I opened the drawer and dropped the photo inside, face down. I didn't want to see his face. The sun was starting to come up. The gray light of dawn was filtering through the curtains. I hadn't slept a wink, but I didn't feel tired. I felt a strange, buzzing energy. I wasn't just sad anymore. I was angry. And I knew that when the sun fully rose, I had work to do. Because Mark thought this was just a fight. He thought he would stay at his mother's for a few days, I would cool down, apologize, and beg him to come back. He had no idea that I wasn't cooling down. I was just getting started. The morning sun was barely hitting the kitchen table when a knock echoed through the silent house. It wasn't Mark, he still had his key, unfortunately, though I had put the chain on. I peeked through the blinds. It was my sister, Nancy. I opened the door, and Nancy didn't even say hello. She just marched in, holding 2 large coffees and a bag of bagels. Nancy is 3 years older than me, divorced twice, and has 0 tolerance for nonsense. She's the kind of woman who would bring a baseball bat to a knife fight. I got your text last night, she said, setting the coffee down. You finally kicked the leech out. It's about damn time. I brought breakfast and bail money, just in case you killed him. I didn't kill him, Nancy, I said, managing a weak smile. I just packed his bag. Good. Better, she nodded. But we need to change the locks today. I know how Mark works. He'll be back, trying to worm his way in. Before I could answer, there was another knock. Softer this time. It was Carol. Carol looked terrible. Her eyes were swollen red, she wasn't wearing makeup, and she was wearing sweatpants, a rare sight for her. She looked nervous to come in, standing on the doormat like she was afraid I would yell at her. Can I come in? She whispered. Get in here, Nancy said, pulling her inside. We're having a war council. We sat at the kitchen table. The silence was thick. Carol was wringing her hands, staring at her coffee cup. Linda, Carol started, her voice shaking. I have to show you something. I should have shown you months ago. I was scared. I didn't want you to think I was encouraging him. I didn't want to ruin your marriage. What is it? I asked, feeling a pit form in my stomach. Carol reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She unlocked it, opened her messages, and slid the phone across the table to me. Read them, she said. Scroll up. I picked up the phone. The contact name was Mark, Linda's husband. I started reading. My hands began to tremble. It wasn't just the public jokes. It wasn't just the comments at dinner parties. This was a campaign. October 12th, 2:45 p.m., saw you jogging past the park. Those shorts should be illegal. Wish I was running behind you. October 15th, 11:30 p.m., Linda is asleep on the couch with her mouth open. Snoring. God, I wish I was talking to you instead. You're the only one who gets me. NOV02, 10 a.m., why are you with David? The guy is a bore. You need a real man. Someone who knows how to handle a woman like you. November 14th, 1:15 a.m., I can't stop thinking about you, Carol. It's torture being in this house. If you gave me one sign, just one, I'd leave all this. We could run away. I'm serious. There were dozens of them. Photos of him at the gym flexing. Links to songs with captions like thinking of you. I scrolled and scrolled. It went back 6 months. He sent these when I was at work, I whispered. He sent these while he was sitting next to me watching TV. I never replied to them, Carol said quickly, tears spilling over. Or if I did, it was to tell him to stop. Look. I looked. Carol's replies were short and cold. Mark, stop. This is inappropriate. You are drunk, go to sleep. I love Linda, don't ever say that to me again. But he didn't stop. He kept pushing. He kept harassing her. He told me last week that he was going to leave you anyway, Carol sobbed. He said you were dead weight. He said he was just waiting for the right time. I wanted to tell you, but David said we should wait until after the wedding, so it wouldn't cause a scene. I'm so sorry, Linda. I felt so guilty. I handed the phone back to her. I felt sick. Physically sick. But strangely, the tears didn't come. Instead, a cold, hard clarity washed over me. You have nothing to be sorry for, I told Carol. I reached out and took her hand. You were being harassed. By my husband. Nancy snatched the phone from the table. Send all of these to Linda. Right now. Screenshots. Every single one. Why? Carol asked, wiping her eyes. Because this isn't just a breakup anymore, Nancy said, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. This is ammunition. He's going to try to paint Linda as the crazy, jealous wife. He's going to tell everyone she overreacted to a joke. These texts prove he's a predator. He's an emotional cheater. Nancy's right, I said. My voice sounded different to me. Stronger. Send them. I want everything. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Mark. Mark, are you done with your little tantrum? I need my other shoes. I'm coming over around noon to get them. Don't lock the door. I looked at Nancy. Nancy looked at the text and smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, he's coming over? Nancy cracked her knuckles. Good. Let him come. But he's not getting in. I need to call a lawyer, I said, standing up. I need to know what my rights are before he gets here. I already have a name, Nancy said. Stevens. He's a shark. He handled my second divorce. He eats men like Mark for breakfast. I looked at the kitchen clock. It was 9 a.m. My life as I knew it was over. But looking at my sister and my best friend, I realized I wasn't alone. Mark had tried to isolate me, to make me feel small and unloved compared to Carol. But in doing so, he had just pushed the two people who loved me most right into my corner. Send the texts, Carol, I said. And Nancy, call the locksmith. By 10 a.m., the house sounded like a construction zone. The locksmith was drilling into the front door, replacing the standard deadbolt with a high-security electronic lock. It cost me $300, but the peace of mind was worth every penny. Just as the locksmith was finishing up, my phone rang. The screen flashed Barbara MIL. My stomach tightened. Barbara, Mark's mother, was a piece of work. She was 78 years old, wore too much floral perfume, and believed her son was God's gift to the female population. In her eyes, Mark could do no wrong. If he failed a job interview, it was the interviewer's fault. If he gained weight, it was my cooking. I looked at Nancy. It's Barbara. Put it on speaker, Nancy ordered, pouring herself a third cup of coffee. I need some entertainment. I took a deep breath and answered. Hello, Barbara. Linda. Her voice shrilled through the speaker. What on earth is going on? Mark is sitting here at my kitchen table, absolutely distraught. He says you threw him out on the street in the middle of the night like a dog. I didn't throw him out, I said calmly. I packed his bag and asked him to leave. There's a difference. Over a joke? Barbara scoffed. Really, Linda? He told me what happened. He made a little harmless comment at dinner, and you flew off the handle. You know how Mark is. He has a colorful sense of humor. You're being incredibly sensitive. Men have needs to express themselves. Express themselves? I repeated, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. Barbara, he told my best friend he would leave me for her. He's been texting her for 6 months asking her to run away with him. That's not a joke. That's infidelity. That's harassment. There was a pause on the other end. For a second, I thought I had gotten through to her. Well, Barbara said, her tone shifting from shock to dismissive. Maybe if you took better care of yourself, he wouldn't be looking elsewhere. A man's eyes wander when he's not satisfied at home, Linda. You've been working so much lately, you're never home to cook for him, you've let yourself go. Honestly, can you blame him for noticing a younger, fitter woman? The air left the room. Nancy's jaw dropped. Carol put her hand over her mouth. I had heard Barbara make little digs before, but this? This was victim blaming at its finest. This was her telling me that I deserved to be emotionally abused because I worked hard to support her unemployed son. Something inside me hardened. The old Linda would have apologized. The old Linda would have promised to try harder. But the old Linda was gone. She died the moment Mark made that joke. Listen to me very carefully, Barbara, I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. I work hard to pay for the roof over your son's head. I pay for his food. I pay for his car. I have supported him for 4 years while he found himself. If that's not enough for him, then he is free to find someone else to leech off of. Maybe you can support him now. Because I am done. How dare you speak to me like that? Barbara gasped. I am your elder. You are a selfish, cold-hearted woman. No wonder he wants Carol. She's sweet. She would never. Carol hates him, Barbara, I cut her off. She showed me the texts. She thinks he's creepy. Everyone thinks he's creepy. And by the way, I'm changing the locks. So tell Mark not to bother coming over unless he wants to talk to the police. I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking, but I felt powerful. Nancy started slow clapping. That, she said, grinning like a shark, was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. I can't believe she said that to you, Carol said, looking furious. Blaming you? That's disgusting. It's what she does, I said, putting the phone down. She's an enabler. She created him. She taught him that nothing is ever his fault. My phone dinged again. A text from Mark. Mark, Mom is crying. I hope you're happy. You're tearing this family apart. I'm coming over to get my golf clubs and my other suits. Be there in 20. He's coming, I said. Nancy walked over to the door and checked the new lock. She turned the deadbolt with a satisfying thunk. Let him come, Nancy said. The door stays shut. If he wants his golf clubs, he can wait until the lawyers get involved. Possession is 9/10 of the law, right? I don't think that applies to golf clubs, I said, but I don't care. He's not coming in. I looked around my living room. For years, I had walked on eggshells here, afraid to disturb Mark's mood. Now, it felt like a fortress. And I was the queen protecting her castle. But I knew Mark. He wouldn't give up easily. And I knew that his mother's words about money and needs were a warning sign. Mark cared about two things, his ego and his wallet. I had bruised his ego. Now, I needed to protect my wallet. Nancy, I said. Drive me to the bank. Now. Why? Because, I said, grabbing my purse. Mark has a secondary card on my main savings account. The account we use for the house repairs and emergency fund. If he's angry, he's going to try to hurt me where it counts. Nancy grabbed her keys. Let's ride. We didn't go straight to the bank. Nancy insisted we stop at the law office first. You don't move money until a lawyer tells you it's okay, she advised. You don't want a judge thinking you're hiding assets. Mr. Stevens' office smelled of old leather and stale coffee. He was a small man with sharp glasses and a demeanor that suggested he had seen every possible way a marriage could implode. I sat across from him, clutching a folder of bank statements I had hastily printed out. So, Stevens said, looking over the text messages Carol had sent me. He has a pattern of harassment. He has publicly humiliated you. And he has been unemployed for 4 years? Yes, I said. I pay for everything. And the house? In both our names, I said. But the down payment came from my inheritance from my grandmother. Stevens nodded, making notes. In Ohio, equitable distribution is the standard. But his conduct, and the financial dependency, it complicates things. We need to look at the finances. Have you noticed any unusual activity lately? No, I said. I mean, I pay the bills. Mark has a card for groceries and gas. Stevens leaned forward. Linda, in my experience, when a man is stepping out, or trying to step out, money starts leaking. Check the statements. Now. I opened the folder. I had printed the last 3 months of our joint savings account, the rainy day fund. It was supposed to have about $40,000 in it. We had been saving for a new roof and eventually, retirement. I scanned the lines. My heart skipped a beat. September 12th, withdrawal $500. September 20th, withdrawal $800. October 4th, Diamond District Jewelers $2,500. I gasped. Wait. He spent $2,500 at a jewelry store in October? Did you get a necklace? Nancy asked dryly. No, I whispered. I got a blender for my birthday in October. I kept reading. October 15th, withdrawal $1,000. November 1st, cash advance $500. There were dozens of them. Small withdrawals. Cash advances. Dinners at steakhouses I had never been to. The balance, Stephen said. Look at the ending balance. I looked at the bottom of the page. Current balance, $12,450. He spent nearly $30,000, I said, my voice trembling. In 6 months? Where did it go? The jewelry store, Carol said softly. Remember I told you he said he wanted to impress women? He probably bought gifts. Not for me, but maybe for others? Or maybe he pawned it for cash. Or gambling, Nancy suggested. Or just burning it to feel like a big shot. I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. The betrayal of the text was one thing, that was emotional. But this? This was my labor. This was the hours I spent staring at spreadsheets until my eyes burned. This was the vacations I didn't take. This was the car I didn't upgrade. I had sacrificed my life to save that money for our future. And he had stolen it. He had stolen our future to fund his fantasy life. He's a thief, I said, anger replacing the shock. He's a thief, Mr. Stevens. He is a spouse using marital funds, Stevens corrected gently, though his eyes were hard. Technically, he has access. But this is dissipation of assets. He spent marital money on non-marital pursuits. We can argue that in court. We can try to get that deducted from his share of the house. Can I cut him off? I asked. Right now? You can't leave him with $0 for food, Stevens said. The court frowns on that. But you absolutely should protect what is left. Open a separate account in your name only. Transfer half of the remaining joint funds into it immediately. Cancel the credit cards that are in your name with him as an authorized user. If he has his own cards, let him rack up debt on them. That will be his problem. What about the retirement fund? I asked, panic rising. My 401k? He can't touch that without your signature, Stevens said. But in a divorce, he might be entitled to half of what accrued during the marriage. However, given the dissipation of the savings, we have leverage. We trade. He keeps his debt, you keep your retirement. We fight dirty if we have to. I stood up. I felt dizzy, but focused. I'm going to the bank, I said. I'm taking half of the $12,000 left. And I'm canceling every single card. Good, Stevens said. And Linda? When he finds out, and he will find out within the hour, do not engage. Do not argue. Tell him to call me. I walked out of that office with a mission. Mark had taken my love. He had taken my dignity. He had taken $30,000 of my hard-earned money. But he wasn't taking another cent. The bank manager, Mrs. Gable, knew me. She looked concerned when I marched in with Nancy flanking me like a bodyguard. I explained the situation briefly: separation, financial irregularities. She nodded sympathetically and helped me open a new individual checking account. We transferred exactly $6,225, half of the remaining balance, into my new account. I left the other half for Mark. I wasn't going to be the villain here. I was following the law. Then came the credit cards. Cancel the Visa ending in 4590, I said. Remove Mark as an authorized user on the Amex. Done and done, Mrs. Gable said. The cards are dead effective immediately. We walked out of the bank into the bright afternoon sun. I felt lighter. I checked my watch. It was 1 p.m. Mark usually went to lunch around now. He liked to go to this Italian place downtown, on my dime, apparently. I didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Mark. I looked at Nancy. She nodded. Answer it. But remember, do not engage. Redirect to Stevens. I slid the bar to answer. Hello? UB*TCH. Mark's voice screamed into my ear. It was so loud Nancy could hear it from the passenger seat. You embarrassed me. I'm at Luigi's. The waiter just declined my card in front of everyone. In front of the guys. I removed you as an authorized user, Mark, I said calmly. The account is in my name. That is our money. That is my credit line, he shouted. How am I supposed to pay for lunch? How am I supposed to put gas in the car? You have $6,000 in the joint checking account, I said. Use your debit card. Or get a job. You're stealing from me, he sputtered. I'm going to call the police. You can't just cut me off. I didn't cut you off, I said. I secured my assets. You spent $30,000 from our savings in 6 months, Mark. I saw the statements. The jewelry store? The cash advances? Silence. Dead silence on the other end. The wind went right out of his sails. He didn't know I knew. Those were investments, he stammered, his voice dropping an octave. I was working on a business deal. You don't understand finance, Linda. I'm an accountant, Mark, I said, almost laughing at the absurdity. I understand finance better than you understand decency. If you have any questions, you can call my attorney, Mr. Stevens. I'll text you his number. Do not call me again. I hung up. My heart was racing, pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. But for the first time, it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline. It was the thrill of fighting back. I looked at my phone. I wanted to block him, but Stevens said to keep the line open for evidence. I turned to Nancy. He's at Luigi's with the guys. He's humiliated. Good, Nancy said, starting the car. Let him wash dishes to pay for his pasta. I took a deep breath. I knew this wasn't over. Mark was a narcissist. Now that I had cut off his supply, both emotional and financial, he would escalate. He would try to hurt me. He would try to destroy my reputation. But I was ready. I have to pause here for a second. My hands are shaking just retelling this part. It's hard to explain the mixture of fear and absolute satisfaction I felt in that moment. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who held financial power over you? Or someone who made you feel like you owed them everything even when they were taking everything from you? If you are listening and you're on my side, please, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button and comment the number 1 down below. Just type 1. It tells me that you're with me, that I'm not crazy, and that you want to see Mark get exactly what he deserves. Your support honestly keeps me going. Seeing those 1s in the comments makes me feel like I have an army behind me. So please, comment 1 right now. Okay, thank you. Now, let me tell you what happened when the phone rang again. Because I thought it was Mark calling back to scream some more. But it wasn't. It was someone I never expected to hear from. My phone rang again at 4 p.m. I was back at home, sitting in the living room with the new deadbolt engaged and a chair wedged under the doorknob just in case. I looked at the caller ID. Frank Phil, father-in-law. I groaned. First Barbara, now Frank. I prepared myself for another lecture. Frank was a quiet man, a retired military officer. He rarely got involved in family drama, usually letting Barbara do all the talking. I assumed Barbara had put him up to this, telling him to call and order me to take Mark back. I answered stiffly. "Hello, Frank." "Linda," his voice was gruff, deep. "I heard what happened. If you're calling to tell me to apologize to Mark," I said, cutting him off, "you can save your breath. I'm not taking him back." There was a long pause. I braced myself for the yelling. "I'm not calling for that," Frank said. His voice sounded tired. "I'm calling to apologize." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'm apologizing," Frank repeated. "Barbara told me her version. She said you went crazy. But I know my son. And I know you. You've been a saint, Linda. You've kept him afloat for years. I told Barbara to shut her mouth, but you know how she is." I felt tears prick my eyes. Unexpected kindness is always what breaks you when you're trying to be strong. He harassed Carol, Frank," I whispered. "It wasn't just a joke." "I believe you," Frank said. I saw the way he looked at her last Thanksgiving. I should have said something then. I raised him, Linda. But somewhere along the way, I failed. He's weak. He's a weak man who needs to tear women down to feel big. And I am ashamed of him. To hear Mark's own father say that, it was validating in a way nothing else could be. "Thank you, Frank," I said. "That means a lot." "Listen," Frank lowered his voice. "I know about the inheritance. My estate. Mark had always bragged that when his parents passed, we would be rich. Frank had done well in real estate. It was Mark's safety net, the reason he felt he didn't really need to work hard. Mark thinks he's getting a big payout when I kick the bucket," Frank said. "He's been counting on it. He's probably borrowing against it in his head." "Probably," I agreed. "Well," Frank said, "I called my lawyer an hour ago. I'm changing the will. I'm putting his share into a trust. He can't touch the principal. He'll get a small monthly stipend, enough for rent and food, but he won't get a lump sum to blow on sports cars and women." "And Linda?" "Yes. I'm leaving you a portion," he said. "Directly. You were a good daughter-in-law. You took care of us when Barbara had her hip surgery. Mark didn't visit once. You did. I'm not forgetting that." "Frank, you don't have to." "I'm doing it," he said firmly. "And one more thing. If you need a lawyer, keep the one you have, but send the bill to me. I'll pay for your divorce." I gasped. "Frank, I can't ask you to fund a divorce against your own son." "It's not against my son," Frank said. "It's for justice. He needs to learn a lesson, and apparently, hitting rock bottom is the only way he's going to learn. You do what you have to do, Linda. Burn him down if you have to. Maybe out of the ashes, he'll finally grow up." He hung up. I stared at the phone. I had expected a battle on all fronts. I expected to be fighting Mark, his parents, and the world. But instead, I had an army. I had Nancy. I had Carol. And now, incredibly, I had Frank. Mark thought he had all the power because he was a man and I was just his boring wife. But he forgot one thing. When you treat people with kindness for 20 years, they remember. And when you treat people like garbage, they remember that too. Mark was about to find out that he was very, very alone. But the war wasn't over. Mark was desperate now. He had no money, no home, and his father had just turned on him, though he didn't know that yet. A desperate narcissist is a dangerous thing. And I had no idea that while I was securing my bank accounts, Mark was planning his next move, one that would bring the police to my doorstep before the sun went down. The sun had gone down hours ago, but the adrenaline from my conversation with Frank, Mark's father, was still buzzing in my veins. I had spent the evening double-checking the windows. I had wedged a heavy dining chair under the front doorknob, just like they do in the movies. It felt ridiculous, honestly. I was a 52-year-old accountant living in a quiet suburb. I shouldn't have been fortifying my house like it was a bunker. Nancy had gone home to feed her cats but promised to keep her phone on loud. I was alone. Just me and the silence of the house that suddenly felt way too big. Around 11:45 p.m., I was sitting in the living room with just one lamp on, scrolling through my iPad, trying to distract myself, when I heard it. Scritch. Scratch. It was the sound of metal on metal at the front door. My heart stopped. Literally stopped. Then it hammered against my ribs so hard it hurt. I sat frozen, listening. Jiggle. Thump. Someone was trying to put a key into the lock. Mark. I knew his rhythm. I knew the way he aggressively jiggled the handle when he was impatient. He was trying to get in. I stood up, my socks sliding silently on the hardwood floor. I crept into the hallway, staying out of the line of sight of the glass panels on the side of the door. "Come on, you piece of junk," I heard him mutter. His voice was slurred. He was drunk. Of course, he was drunk. He turned the key again, harder this time. But the new electronic deadbolt Nancy and I had installed that morning didn't budge. It wasn't just a mechanical lock anymore, it was a solid steel bar that wasn't going to yield to his old key. "Linda," he shouted. He banged his fist on the door. "I know you're in there. Open the damn door. My key isn't working." I stood in the shadows, trembling. Part of me, the old, conditioned part, wanted to rush over, open it, and apologize. Don't make him mad. Just let him in, give him what he wants, and he'll go away. That was the script I had followed for 25 years. But I looked at the heavy chair wedged under the knob. I looked at my shaking hands. And I remembered the $30,000 missing from my savings. I remembered the texts to Carol. I pulled out my phone. I didn't call Nancy. I dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? There is a man trying to break into my house, I whispered. He is intoxicated and aggressive. Do you know the man, ma'am? Yes, I said, my voice gaining strength. It's my estranged husband. He doesn't live here anymore. I have asked him to leave, and he is trying to force the door. Okay, officers are on the way. Is he armed? I don't think so. But he's angry. While I was on the phone, the banging got louder. Mark was kicking the door now. This is my house, he screamed. You can't lock me out of my own house, you crazy witch. I need my files. Open the door or I'm going to break a window. I moved into the kitchen, grabbing the biggest knife from the butcher block. Not because I intended to use it, but because I needed to hold on to something sharp to feel like I wasn't helpless. Blue and red lights flashed through the front window. Thank God. I peeked through the blinds. 2 police cars had pulled up. I saw Mark freeze. He was standing on the porch, his shirt untucked, looking disheveled and pathetic. I watched as 2 officers approached him. Mark immediately put his hands up, putting on his charming guy act. I could see him gesturing, pointing at the house, probably telling them I was the crazy one, that it was a misunderstanding. The dispatcher told me it was safe to open the door. I pulled the chair away and unlocked the deadbolt. I opened the door. The cool night air hit my face. Mark turned to look at me, his eyes full of venom. She changed the locks, officer. Mark shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. That's illegal. You can't lock a man out of his marital home. One of the officers, a tall woman with a stern face, looked at me. Ma'am, is this your husband? He is, I said, crossing my arms. But he moved out yesterday. He took his belongings. He is here harassing me and threatening to break my windows. I do not feel safe. I just wanted my birth certificate. Mark lied. And my golf clubs. At midnight, the officer asked dryly. Sir, you're intoxicated. You need to leave. I'm not leaving until I get my stuff. Mark lunged toward the door. The officers were on him in a second. They didn't arrest him, but they physically blocked him, pushing him back toward the driveway. Sir, you are trespassing at this point, the officer said. This is a civil matter. If you want your property, you go through lawyers. If you step foot on this porch again tonight, you will be arrested for disturbing the peace. Do you understand? Mark looked at the cops, then at me. He looked like a cornered rat. Fine, he spat. Fine. Keep the house. Keep the garbage. You'll be hearing from my lawyer, Linda. You're going to regret this. I haven't regretted anything since yesterday, I said loudly enough for him to hear. I watched them escort him to his car, which, thankfully, they didn't let him drive. They made him call a cab. I stood in the doorway, wrapped in my cardigan, watching the taxi taillights fade down the street. I closed the door. I locked it. I put the chair back. I went into the kitchen and put the knife back in the block. My hands were still shaking, but the fear was shifting into something else. Mark had just shown me exactly who he was. He wasn't a partner. He was an intruder. And tonight, for the first time in my life, I had defended my territory. The next morning, the silence of the house was replaced by the incessant buzzing of my phone. It started around 7 a.m. and didn't stop. I picked it up, expecting texts from Mark. Instead, it was notifications from Facebook. Susan commented on a post you're tagged in. Debbie reacted to a post. John sent you a message request. I opened the app, and my stomach dropped. Mark had gone nuclear. At 3 a.m., likely drunk and sitting in his mother's guest room, Mark had written a manifesto. A long, rambling status update that painted him as the martyr of the century. It is with a heavy heart that I announce my marriage is ending, the post began. I have tried everything to make Linda happy. I have supported her, loved her, and stood by her through her moods and her distance. But unfortunately, she has decided to listen to toxic friends instead of her husband. Last night, she kicked me out of our home and called the police on me when I tried to retrieve my medication. I am heartbroken that after 25 years, loyalty means nothing anymore. Please pray for me as I navigate this betrayal. It had 45 likes. 45 people who bought his lies. The comments were worse. His aunt wrote, "Stay strong, Mark. You deserve better." One of his golf buddies wrote, "Women flip a switch at that age, man. Lawyer up." Even a neighbor I thought liked me commented, "So sad to hear this. There are always two sides." He didn't mention Carol. He didn't mention the harassment. He didn't mention the stolen money. He carefully curated a story where he was the gentle, discarded husband and I was the walk-away wife having a midlife crisis. I wanted to scream. I wanted to type a furious reply. I wanted to post the screenshots of his texts to Carol right there in the comments section and burn his reputation to the ground. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Just do it, a voice in my head said. Expose him. But then I remembered Mr. Stevens' advice. Do not engage. Let him dig his own grave. If I posted the texts now, I would look messy. I would look like I was just as dramatic as he was. I needed to be the classy one. I needed to be the one with dignity. But it was so hard. Being the bigger person is exhausted when the smaller person is standing on a megaphone telling lies about you. I called Nancy. Did you see it? I saw it, Nancy said, her voice sounding like she was chewing gravel. I'm currently fighting the urge to drive over to Barbara's house and throw eggs at his car. But don't worry. I screenshotted everything. Steven said to document it. This proves he is trying to alienate you socially. People believe him, Nancy, I said, feeling tears of frustration. People I've known for 20 years are liking his post. Those people are sheep, Nancy said. And the ones who matter? They'll wait for the truth. Or they'll call you. She was right. Throughout the day, I got a few calls from my real friends. Not the casual acquaintances, but the women who knew me. They called to ask, Linda, are you okay? This doesn't sound like you. To them, I told the truth. Calmly. Without hysterics. I told them, Mark has been harassing Carol for months. He drained our savings. I had to protect myself. The shock on the other end of the line was palpable. The gossip mill in our small town was about to shift gears. But Mark wasn't done. By noon, he had changed his profile picture to a sad, black and white selfie. He posted a quote about karma. The irony was suffocating. I realized that Mark was trying to win the court of public opinion because he knew he was going to lose in the court of law. He needed to be the victim because if he wasn't the victim, he was the monster. And Mark's ego could not handle being the monster. I decided to do something radical. I deactivated my Facebook. I didn't block him. I just vanished. I took away his audience. I took away his target. If he wanted to shadowbox with a ghost, let him. I spent the afternoon cleaning the house. I scrubbed the floors. I took down the photos of us in the hallway. I packed his man cave into boxes. Every item of his I touched felt like shedding a layer of skin. His bowling trophy? Box. His collection of shot glasses? Box. The ugly recliner he insisted on keeping? I dragged it to the curb with a free sign on it. A neighbor walked by while I was sweating, hauling the chair. It was Mrs. Gable, the bank manager who lived 2 streets over. Spring cleaning? She asked, eyeing the chair. Life cleaning, I said, wiping my forehead. She smiled, a knowing look in her eye. Good for you, Linda. Good for you. Mark could have Facebook. I had my reality. And my reality was starting to look a lot less cluttered. 2 days later, I decided it was time to stop hiding. Mark's narrative was spreading, and while I had deactivated Facebook, I couldn't live under a rock. I invited our core group of friends over for wine and cheese. These were 3 couples we had known for over a decade, the Millers, the Johnsons, and the Rodriguezes. I was terrified. These were our friends. Mutual friends. I didn't know whose side they would take. They arrived looking awkward. The tension in my living room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone was holding their wine glasses a little too tightly. Finally, Dave Miller spoke up. So, Linda. Mark called me. He's pretty messed up. He says you just snapped. I took a deep breath. Carol was sitting next to me, squeezing my hand under the table. Nancy was in the kitchen, pretending to arrange crackers but ready to jump in if needed. I didn't snap, Dave, I said quietly. I woke up. I looked at them. I know Mark is charming. I know he's the fun guy at the parties. But there is a side of him you don't see. Or maybe you did see it, and you just thought it was Mark being Mark. I nodded to Carol. Carol pulled out her phone. We had printed the screenshots. Pages and pages of them. We passed them around the table. I watched their faces. Dave Miller read the first page and went pale. Susan Johnson covered her mouth. Maria Rodriguez frowned, her eyes scanning the timestamps. He sent these while we were all at the barbecue last month? Susan asked, her voice trembling. I remember that day. He was sitting right next to you, Linda. Yes, I said. He was holding my hand with one hand and texting my best friend with the other, asking her to send him nudes. The silence was absolute. The fun guy image was shattering in real time. Then, something unexpected happened. Mike Rodriguez, a quiet guy who usually just followed Mark's lead, cleared his throat. He looked down at his shoes. I knew, Mike said softly. Maria turned to him sharply. What did you say? I didn't know about the texts, Mike said quickly, looking terrified of his wife. But Mark talks. In the locker room. At golf. He made bets. Bets? I asked, my blood running cold. He bet us a case of beer that he could, get with Carol before Christmas, Mike admitted, his face bright red. I thought he was just being gross. Just locker room talk. I didn't know he was actually pursuing it. I'm sorry, Linda. I should have shut him up. Yes, you should have, Maria snapped, hitting him on the arm. That is disgusting. I looked at Mike. I felt a wave of nausea, but also relief. Thank you for telling the truth, Mike. The dynamic in the room shifted instantly. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by collective outrage. They weren't neutral anymore. They were horrified. He told me you cut off his money, Dave Miller said, shaking his head. He made it sound like you were starving him. But, knowing this? Linda, you should have left him with nothing. I left him half, I said. Because I'm fair. Which is more than he deserves. By the end of the night, the tribe had spoken. They hugged me. They apologized for believing his Facebook post. Susan promised to unfollow him immediately. As they left, I felt a weight lift off my chest. Mark's greatest weapon was his charm, his ability to manipulate people into thinking he was the good guy. But the truth is a powerful thing. Once people see the monster behind the mask, they can't unsee it. I closed the door and leaned against it. I had my friends back. I had my dignity back. But I still had one more box to pack. The stuff from the very back of Mark's closet. The stuff he hadn't touched in years. Or so I thought. The weekend before the first mediation session, I decided to finish purging the house. I wanted every trace of Mark gone before I had to sit across a table from him and negotiate the end of our lives. I was in the master bedroom, tackling the top shelf of the closet. This was the junk shelf, old shoeboxes, tax returns from 1998, tangled Christmas lights. I pulled down a dusty Nike shoebox that was taped shut. I assumed it was old baseball cards or maybe receipts. I sat on the bed and peeled off the yellowing Scotch tape. Inside, there were no baseball cards. There was a stack of photos and a small, black moleskine notebook. I picked up the photos first. They were printed on regular paper, grainy and zoomed in. My brow furrowed. They looked like candid shots. I shuffled through them. Carol walking her dog. Carol getting into her car at the grocery store. Carol stretching on her yoga mat in the park. These weren't photos Mark had taken while we were hanging out. These were photos taken from a distance. From inside a car. Through a window. My breath caught in my throat. I dropped the photos on the duvet as if they burned me. I picked up the black notebook. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely open the cover. The first page was dated 2 years ago. August 12th, she wore the blue leggings today. Yoga at 9 a.m. Coffee at the beanery at 10:15. She smiled at the barista. Why doesn't she smile at me like that? August 14th, followed her to the mall. She bought perfume. Vanilla scent. I need to tell Linda to buy that scent. I flipped through the pages, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. It went on and on. Page after page of detailed logs. September 3rd, David picked her up. He put his hand on her lower back. I wanted to break his fingers. She belongs to me. She just doesn't know it yet. October 31st, Halloween party. I'm going to corner her in the kitchen. I need to touch her. This wasn't just a crush. This wasn't just a midlife crisis. This was a predator. My husband, the man who slept next to me, who ate my cooking, who watched Netflix with me, had been stalking my best friend for 2 years. He had been documenting her movements. He had been fantasizing about hurting her fiancé. I felt bile rise in my throat. I ran to the bathroom and dry heaved over the sink. I washed my face with cold water, staring at myself in the mirror. I looked pale, ghostly. How had I missed this? How had I been so blind? I thought he was just a jerk. I thought he was just a cheater. But he was dangerous. I grabbed my phone and called Nancy. Come over, I gasped. Now. And bring a Ziploc bag. We need to preserve evidence. When Nancy arrived and saw the notebook, she didn't say a word. She went into full protective mode. She put on rubber gloves, she keeps them in her car for cleaning, thank God, and carefully placed the notebook and photos into a large plastic bag. This changes everything, Linda, Nancy said, her voice low and scary. This isn't just divorce court material. This is restraining order material. This is criminal. He was watching her, I whispered, hugging myself. He knew her schedule better than I did. Nancy, what if I hadn't kicked him out? What was he planning to do? Nancy looked at the entry about breaking fingers. She looked at me. We aren't going to find out, she said firmly. Because we are going to bury him. We took photos of every single page. I sent them to Stevens immediately with the caption, urgent. Found in closet. Stevens called me 5 minutes later. He didn't sound like a calm lawyer anymore. He sounded like a general going to war. Do not touch that notebook again, Stevens ordered. Bring it to my office immediately. We aren't just going for a divorce anymore, Linda. We are going for a scorched earth victory. Mark isn't walking away with half the assets. With this? He'll be lucky if he walks away with his freedom. I drove to the lawyer's office with the bag on the passenger seat. It felt radioactive. Mark had spent years making me feel small, making me feel like I was the crazy, jealous wife. But inside that little black book was the proof that he was the crazy one. He was the unstable one. And on Monday morning, at the mediation table, I was going to make sure he realized that his little game was over. The discovery of the notebook shattered something in me. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was a profound, shaking fear. I found myself checking the locks 5 times a night. I jumped when the ice maker dropped ice. I couldn't look at wedding photos without seeing a stranger's eyes staring back at me. I realized I couldn't handle this alone. Stevens was handling the legal side, but my brain was a mess. I made an emergency appointment with Dr. Evans, a therapist Nancy recommended. Her office was soft lighting, soft chairs, soft music. It was the opposite of my life right now. I feel stupid, I told her, clutching a tissue. That's the main thing. How did I live with a monster for 25 years and not know? Was I that desperate? Was I that blind? Dr. Evans looked at me kindly. Linda, predators are masters of camouflage. They don't start out as monsters. They start out as charming. They groom you. They slowly erode your boundaries so that by the time they show their true face, you're already trained not to see it. She asked me about my childhood. I hadn't planned on talking about that, but suddenly it all came pouring out. I talked about my mother. She was a saint, but she was a doormat. My father was a loud, demanding man who expected dinner on the table at 6 p.m. sharp. If it was late, he sulked. If the house wasn't clean, he critiqued. My mother never fought back. She just worked harder. She taught me that keeping the peace was the highest virtue a woman could have. She taught me that love means endurance, I realized, saying it out loud for the first time. She taught me that if the man is happy, the family is safe. If the man is unhappy, it's the woman's failure. Exactly, Dr. Evans said. You were primed for Mark. When he criticized you, it felt familiar. When he demanded things, it felt like love, because that's the model you had. You weren't stupid, Linda. You were conditioned. That session was painful. It was like ripping a bandage off a wound that had been festering for decades. I cried for the little girl who watched her mother shrink to make room for her father. I cried for the young bride who thought Mark's jealousy was passion. I cried for the woman who spent years trying to be as perfect as Carol, not realizing the game was rigged from the start. But Dr. Evans gave me homework. She told me to write a letter to my younger self. Not a letter of blame, but a letter of protection. I went home that night and sat at my kitchen table. Dear Linda, I wrote. You are not a failure because he couldn't love you. You are not broken because he tried to break you. You stayed because you have a big heart. You stayed because you value commitment. Those are beautiful things. But he weaponized your virtues against you. It is not your job to fix him. It is not your job to save him. It is your job to save yourself. Writing that letter changed something in me. The shame began to evaporate. I realized that Mark's behavior wasn't a reflection of my worth, it was a reflection of his sickness. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a survivor. I called Carol that night. We hadn't talked much about the notebook because I knew she was terrified. How are you holding up? I asked. David is installing cameras, Carol said, her voice tight. We're changing our route to the gym. Linda. I'm scared. Don't be, I said, feeling a surge of fierce protectiveness. Because on Monday, we are going to end this. Stevens has the book. Mark is going to be so busy dealing with the legal fallout, he won't have time to look in your direction ever again. You sound different, Carol said. I am different, I replied. I'm done keeping the peace. I'm ready to start a war. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and rain. It fit the mood perfectly. I put on my best suit, a navy blue one that Mark always said was too masculine. I put on red lipstick. Nancy picked me up. Ready to skin a cat? She asked. Let's go, I said. We drove to the mediation center. My stomach was doing flip-flops, but my hands were steady. I had the truth on my side. I had the law on my side. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of Mark. I pitied him. The conference room was cold and smelled of stale coffee. On one side of the long mahogany table sat Mark and his lawyer, a slick-looking guy named Mr. Vance who wore a suit that cost more than my car. On my side, it was me and Stevens. Mark looked terrible. He was trying to hide it, but I saw the dark circles under his eyes. His fake tan was fading, leaving him looking sallow. He was wearing his power suit, but it hung a little loose on him. When I walked in, Mark didn't look at me. He stared at his notepad, clicking his pen aggressively. Click. 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 It used to make me nervous. Now it just annoyed me. Let's begin, the mediator said. Mr. Vance started immediately. He was aggressive, loud, and condescending. My client has been wrongfully evicted from his marital home, Vance stated, sliding a stack of papers across the table. He has suffered emotional distress and reputational damage due to Ms. Linda's slanderous claims. We are asking for 60% of the marital assets, spousal support of $2,000 a month for 5 years to allow my client to re-establish himself, and full ownership of the 2019 Lexus. I almost laughed. Spousal support? For him? Stephen sat calmly, his hands folded. He let Vance finish his speech. He let Mark smirk, thinking he was winning. Are you finished? Stevens asked politely. We are, Vance said, leaning back. Unless your client wants to settle now and save everyone the embarrassment. Oh, we want to settle, Stevens said. He reached into his briefcase. The sound of the latch clicking echoed in the room. He pulled out a thick binder. Then, he pulled out a clear plastic bag containing the black moleskine notebook. I saw Mark's eyes flick to the bag. His face went from smug to sheet white in a nanosecond. He stopped clicking his pen. What is that? Vance asked, frowning. This, Stevens said, is Exhibit A. It is a stalking log kept by your client, detailing the movements, clothing, and daily activities of Ms. Linda's best friend, Carol, over a period of 2 years. Stevens opened the binder. And these, he pointed to the photocopies, are transcripts of text messages where your client solicits an affair, disparages his wife, and admits to misappropriating marital funds to buy gifts for women who are not his wife. Mark started to stand up. That's private property. You stole that. Sit down, Mark. Vance barked at his own client. The lawyer looked at the notebook, then at the transcripts. His confidence evaporated. He realized he had walked into a minefield. Stevens continued, his voice icy. We also have bank records showing $32,000 of marital savings drained by Mark for personal use, specifically jewelry, gambling, and hotel rooms. That is dissipation of assets. Stevens slid a single piece of paper across the table. Here is our counteroffer, Stevens said. Mark gets 0% of the house. 0% of Linda's retirement. No spousal support. He takes his car and his personal debt. He signs the divorce papers today. And he agrees to a permanent restraining order regarding Carol and Linda. That's preposterous. Vance spluttered, trying to regain control. You can't leave him with nothing. If he doesn't sign, Stevens said, leaning in, we walk out of here, and I take this notebook to the district attorney. Stalking is a felony in this state, Mr. Vance. Especially given the threatening nature of the entries regarding Carol's fiancé. Do you want to read the entry from October 31st again? Mark looked like he was going to vomit. He looked at his lawyer. Vance was reading the notebook entries, his face disgusted. Even he couldn't defend this. Vance whispered something furiously to Mark. I heard the words jail time and indefensible. Mark looked at me. For the first time, he really looked at me. He didn't see the pushover anymore. He saw the wall. You're ruining my life, Mark hissed, tears of self-pity welling in his eyes. Linda, how can you do this? After everything? You ruined your own life, Mark, I said, my voice steady. I'm just cleaning up the mess. Mark slumped in his chair. He looked small. Defeated. Give me the pen, Mark whispered. Vance handed him a pen. His hand shook so badly he could barely write. He signed the agreement. He signed away the house, the money, the future he thought he was entitled to. Done, Stevens said, snatching the papers back before Mark could change his mind. We'll file this afternoon. I stood up. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out of that conference room, down the hall, and into the parking lot where the rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking. The sun was trying to peek through. I took a deep breath of fresh air. It tasted like freedom. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks later. It was the fastest, cleanest break Stevens had ever orchestrated, mostly because Mark was terrified of the notebook becoming public record. The fallout for Mark was swift and brutal. With no job, no savings, and no sugar mama wife to fund him, Mark crashed hard. He tried to move back in with his parents, assuming Barbara would take him in and nurse his wounds. But he forgot about Frank. I heard the story from Frank himself a week later. Mark had shown up at their doorstep with his suitcases. Frank met him on the porch. He didn't let him in. "I know what you did," Frank told him. "Linda sent me the copies of your little black book. You are a sick man, Mark. And I will not have that sickness in my house." Frank gave him the contact info for a men's shelter and a list of therapists. He handed him a check for $500, enough for a week at a cheap motel, and closed the door. Barbara had cried, of course, but Frank stood his ground. For the first time in their marriage, Frank ruled the roost. He cut Mark out of the will, placing everything into a trust that Mark couldn't touch until he proved 5 years of steady employment and clean therapy records. Mark ended up renting a basement studio apartment in the bad part of town. He got a job at a car wash. I saw him once, from a distance, wiping down a sedan. He looked older. He wasn't wearing his flashy clothes. He looked just like any other guy trying to scrape by. I didn't feel happy seeing him like that. I didn't feel sad, either. I just felt detached. He was a stranger. As for me, I got the house. It was strange being in the house alone at first. It was too quiet. But then, I started to reclaim it. I painted the kitchen a bright, sunny yellow, a color Mark hated. I turned his man cave into a craft room/office for myself. I bought new sheets. I bought the expensive candles he said were a waste of money. Nancy and Carol came over every Friday night. We drank wine, ate pizza, and laughed. Real laughter. Not the walking on eggshells kind. Carol and David got married that spring. I was the maid of honor. Mark wasn't invited, obviously. David had installed a security system, and the restraining order kept Mark far away. At the wedding reception, I stood up to give a toast. I looked at Carol, glowing and happy, safe with a man who adored her. "To love," I said, raising my glass. "Real love. The kind that doesn't hurt. The kind that doesn't hide in shadows. The kind that makes you bigger, not smaller." Everyone cheered. I caught Frank's eye across the room. He was invited, Barbara refused to come. He raised his glass to me and winked. I was 53 years old. I was single. I was living on one income. And I had never been happier. 6 months post-divorce, life had found a new rhythm. I was up for a promotion at work. I had joined a hiking club. I was even flirting with a nice man named Greg who worked in the IT department, nothing serious, just coffee, but it was nice to be looked at with admiration instead of criticism. Then, on a Tuesday night, my email pinged. Subject, thinking of us. From Mark. I stared at the screen. The audacity. The sheer nerve. I opened it, mostly out of morbid curiosity. "Linda. I know I'm not supposed to contact you, but I had to try. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I'm seeing a therapist, court-ordered, but still. I realize now how much I took you for granted. This apartment is terrible. I miss your cooking. I miss our home. I've changed, Linda. I really have. I'm willing to forgive you for the police incident and the money stuff if you're willing to start fresh. We have history. Nobody knows me like you do. Let's grab coffee. Love, Mark." I read it twice. I'm willing to forgive you. He was willing to forgive me? For protecting myself? For stopping him from robbing me blind? The old Linda might have felt a twinge of guilt. The old Linda might have thought, oh, he's lonely, maybe I was too harsh. But the new Linda? The new Linda laughed out loud. A full, belly laugh that startled my cat. He missed my cooking. He missed the house. He didn't miss me. He missed the maid. He missed the ATM. He missed the audience for his ego. He hadn't changed at all. He was just looking for a new host to latch onto. I didn't type a reply. I didn't draft a scathing email detailing his narcissism. He didn't deserve my words. He didn't deserve my energy. I moved my mouse to the top of the screen. I clicked block sender. Then, I went to my phone and blocked his number again, just to be safe. I poured myself a glass of wine and went out to my back porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in purples and oranges. I took a sip of wine and toasted the sunset. Goodbye, Mark, I whispered to the wind. For good. Closing that chapter didn't feel like an ending anymore. It felt like I had just finished the prologue of my life, and the real story was finally beginning. To celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the suitcase incident, Nancy suggested we go on a trip. Somewhere Mark would never go, she said. Somewhere expensive. Somewhere with cabana boys. Turks and Caicos, I said immediately. Mark hated the beach because he hated sand, it gets everywhere, and he hated spending money on hotels. We booked it. First class. The moment we stepped off the plane, the humidity hit me like a warm hug. The water was a color of blue I didn't think existed in nature. For 7 days, Nancy and I lived like queens. We drank mojitos at noon. We got massages on the beach. We ate lobster until we were sick of it. On the 3rd day, I was lying on a lounge chair, listening to the waves crash. I had brought a book, but I wasn't reading. I was looking at the horizon. I started thinking about money. For years, Mark had told me we were broke. He made me panic over every grocery bill. Yet, here I was, on a luxury vacation, paying for it with my own salary, and my bank account was growing. Without his drain on my finances, without his secret spending, his bad investments, his need for toys, I was actually wealthy. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. I could afford this. The poverty mindset he had trapped me in was a lie. Just like everything else. What are you smiling about? Nancy asked, adjusting her sunglasses. I'm realizing I'm rich, I laughed. Not millionaire rich. But freedom rich. The best kind, Nancy clinked her glass against mine. You look 10 years younger, Linda. Seriously. The stress wrinkles are gone. I feel lighter, I admitted. I carried him for so long, Nancy. I didn't realize how heavy he was until I put him down. That night, we went to a local bar where a live band was playing salsa music. A handsome older man asked me to dance. I don't know how, I said, blushing. I'll teach you, he smiled. And I danced. I spun around on the dance floor, my dress twirling, sweating, laughing, messing up the steps and not caring. For 25 years, I had been the boring one. The responsible one. The one who sat and watched the bags while Mark had fun. But that night, spinning under the Caribbean stars, I realized I wasn't boring. I had just been bored. Bored of his drama. Bored of his cruelty. I was alive. And I had a lot of living left to do. It's been exactly 18 months since I packed that bag. I'm sitting in my newly painted kitchen, drinking coffee out of a mug that says Boss Lady, a gift from Carol. Mark is still in his basement apartment, as far as I know. Frank tells me he's working at a hardware store now. He's dating a woman who is 20 years younger than him, and apparently, they fight constantly. I wish her luck. She's going to need it. Or maybe she'll figure it out faster than I did. Carol and David are expecting their first baby. I'm going to be the honorary auntie. Nancy is still Nancy. She's currently dating a retired firefighter who treats her like gold. And me? I'm happy. It's a quiet happiness. It's not the roller coaster of highs and lows I had with Mark. It's steady. It's mine. I look back at the woman I was at that dinner party, scared, humiliated, trying to make everyone else comfortable at the expense of her own soul, and I want to hug her. I want to tell her, it's going to be okay. You are stronger than you think. And he is weaker than he looks. If there is anyone listening to this story right now who feels stuck, anyone who is sitting in a marriage feeling small, feeling crazy, feeling like you're walking on eggshells, please listen to me. The fear of leaving is worse than the reality of leaving. Mark made me believe I couldn't survive without him. He made me believe I was unlovable, incompetent, and old. He was projecting. He was the one who couldn't survive. He was the incompetent one. You have power you don't even know about. You have a voice you haven't used in years. Find it. Use it. If your husband jokes about leaving you, let him. Open the door. Pack the bag. Don't wait for the notebook in the closet. Don't wait for the drained bank account. Trust your gut. If it hurts, it's not love. If it humbles you, it's not partnership. I lost a husband, yes. But I gained a life. And let me tell you, the trade was worth it. My name is Linda. I am 53 years old. I am divorced. And I am finally, wonderfully, free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it helps even one person out there realize their worth. If you enjoyed this story, or if you've ever had to stand up for yourself against someone toxic, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And share this video with a friend who might need to hear it. Also, I want to hear from you. Have you ever found evidence that changed everything? Or have you ever had a flying monkey like my mother-in-law try to guilt trip you? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Stay strong, ladies. You've got this. And so, Linda's journey reminds us of one profound truth: self-worth is not defined by how others see us, but by how we choose to see ourselves. Her story is a testament to the quiet strength that lives within us all, waiting to rise when we stop tolerating what diminishes us. It teaches us that love should never come at the cost of our dignity, and that true courage is found in the moments we stand up, not just for our survival, but for our happiness. Life often tests us in ways we don't expect, but adversity has a way of revealing the resilience we didn't know we had. Linda's decision to reclaim her life wasn't just about leaving behind a toxic relationship, it was about rediscovering her voice, her value, and her power. Her story encourages us to trust our instincts, to set boundaries, and to never settle for anything less than respect and kindness. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose yourself over someone else's comfort? Share your thoughts in the comments, or simply type good if this story resonated with you. Remember, every step towards self-respect is a victory worth celebrating.